Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me for today's webinar on records management, except automated. My name is Laura Froyam. I'm an account executive here at CDI, and I'm happy you are joining me for today's webinar. So our agenda for today will be what is records management, where I'll outline what it really means and some key terminology. Then we'll jump into what tools your Laserfiche system needs to be compliant if you're in an industry that needs to comply with federal regulations. We'll dig into transparent records management, which is more of an older way to implement records management. We'll also talk about flexible records management, which is a newer way to deploy Laserfiche automation for records management. And then we'll jump into talking about the CDI custom workflow activities for records management that can help you get your retention back on track. And then we'll finish up with any questions. A few housekeeping items to note. So everyone will be on mute throughout the duration of the webinar. If you have questions at any time, please type them into the chat and we'll answer them during the questions section at the end. On the line with me, I do have Jeremy from our consulting department. He's here as thanks, Jeremy. He's here as backup in case things get hairy on my end during the demo, or if there are more specific questions I'm not able to address. And then additionally, this webinar will be recorded and available on our YouTube channel. And if you're interested in the slides or learning more, don't hesitate to reach out as we'll provide them upon request. And then finally, I did upload a few brochures on records management, so feel free to download those from the handout section in the webinar screen. So let's jump in. What is records management? Well, Google tells me that Laserfiche records management is the systematic process of managing the lifecycle, creation, retrieval, storage, and disposal of digital and physical records. So on the screen here, I have a Laserfiche folder structure. So many of our clients would attribute this folder tree as to having records management within their organization. In many instances, this folder structure isn't enough. However, some organizations that are affiliated with heavily regulated industries like government or finance or healthcare, these regulations require organizations to ensure their files are retained for a specified amount of time, and an audit trail must be available as proof that the rules have been complied with. So when organizations are bound by these regulations, they can take advantage of Laserfiche for implementing a compliant records retention policy for their records management needs. So what is records retention? Records retention is a practice by which organizations maintain records for set lengths of time and then employ a system of actions to either redirect, store, or dispose those files. The Laserfiche records management is a module add-on to most Laserfiche systems like United, Avante, Rio, and some of the subscription-based platforms. The records management module allows you to set time and or event lifecycle management on your content. So here in this screenshot, we're looking at the records property pane on a file from the thick client. So if you right click on a document, you have records management or records retention applied. This is what you'll see. There's multiple ways you can designate your files, including setting them as permanent records, records that require cutoffs. For example, maybe like a contract needs to be maintained for 5 years after the contract expiration date. The cutoff would indicate that contract expiration date. And then you can even designate your files as vital records, which allows you to review them on a set schedule to determine if you'd like to continue to maintain them or not. So you might be wondering what makes Laserfiche compliant. When we talk about compliance for things like HIPAA, SEC rules, or PCI compliance, it's not as simple as just digitally storing your files in Laserfiche. Compliance and ensuring compliance and ensuring compliance for your organization is multifaceted, and setting up a Laserfiche folder structure is really just the first step. For organizations that do have records regulations to comply with, they must ensure they have all of the appropriate modules with Laserfiche installed and configured to ensure that compliance. Within Laserfiche, those modules consist of the Laserfiche Records Management module and the Laserfiche Advanced Audit Trail module. So again, depending on the platform of Laserfiche you have, these modules may or may not be included. If you are unsure, don't hesitate to reach out to our team and we can help you get to the bottom of it. And then again, the records management module allows you to set up time and or event-based retention on your files. And the audit trail provides reporting and transparency into the records lifecycle in the event of an audit or a legal request be made. So here's just a quick screenshot of the audit trail module. And then as you can see, this screenshot is just a log of all of the happenings associated with your files within your repository. So all audit trail does is track everything a user does. So once a document is stored in Laserfiche, if they move it, if they rename it, if they update a metadata field, if they do anything to a document, that all gets tracked with the audit trail reporting. In addition to audit trail and records management, some organizations will choose to use Laserfiche version control on their files too. So Laserfiche versioning is a feature that is available to all organizations right out of the box. And it can be configured to apply versioning to all documents as they enter the repository, or it can be manually applied on documents on an as-needed basis by the users. And then versioning does work across all document types as well. So even if you bring a document in or you scan a document in as it goes in as a TIFF format, which is an uneditable document type, you can still apply versioning to that document just to ensure, an added layer of protection on your files. So now we're going to take a look into a couple of different ways that records management can be set up. And the first we're going to take a look at is transparent records management. This is more of an older style of deploying records management, as it was rolled out to organizations prior to the records management activities being released in Laserfiche. It was maybe around version 10-ish or a little bit before. Don't quote me on that because I can't quite remember. But this is because Laserfiche records retention wasn't automated, and it required documents to be put into specific folders and would then absorb the record schedules associated with that folder. Then in some instances, the information from those record series would be copied into a separate folder structure for end users to view the content in a more logical format. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So I am going to be working in the Laserfiche or in a Laserfiche self-hosted environment, as well as using the thick client. In some instances, well, everything that I show you today can be set up in a cloud environment as well, and the information and reports that I show can be viewed from the web client as well. So I will point out specifically if something is only available in self-hosted versus a cloud platform. But again, what we're seeing now can be available in either. I'm just displaying it on a desktop. In my repository, I do have a few different folders. And so if we're an organization that has transparent records set up, typically what you would see is a folder like this for records. This little icon indicates that these are records folders that have retention applied to the files. So when you have TRM or transparent records management set up, typically the folder structure that your records manager is working out of is a folder structure by document type. because when you are configuring records retention, you have to do it by document type. Each document type requires a specific time frame for retention, and so it just made sense for records managers to have it set up by document type. And then as you dig into these folders, you'll see just kind of a folder structure throughout. Sometimes we have it set up by year. It's really based on what your team wants. And then from here, in order to provide that transparency to the other users within your organization, there is what is called the TRM, or the replicated folder structure, in more of a user-friendly format. So you go into administration and then you can see all of the associated folders with administration versus having the documents sorted by document type. So again, if we think about human resources has multiple different document types, new hire forms, W-9s, I-9s, and they all maintain, or a majority of them have, different retention policies that are applied. Records manager would see it set up by document type, and the rest of the organizations would go into that HR folder and then see it broken out by employees, and then they would be able to see all the documents associated with that employee. So that's transparent records management. One of the drawbacks to transparent records management, and I want to show you this, so a pro and a con. So if you come into a folder structure and you want to add a new document, we can go ahead and do that. So I'm just going to add a sample document in here, apply a template, and then click OK. And so by dumping this new document in the folder here, if I right-click on it and click on and view the records properties, we'll be able to see that that new document had inherited the retention properties of the folder that it was placed in. So the that's really nice, because then you don't have to apply any of that retention in a transparent records management setup. But on the flip side, if somebody were to take this document and move it into some other folder, I'm going to dump it into test. What's going to happen is that document is going to be stripped of its record properties. So now you can see here, there's no cutoff instructions. Now, there are some ways that you can work around that, and you might want to be mindful of security and permissions that are set up on your records folder. But again, even somebody, a records manager, sometimes may not be perfect, and they might accidentally click, drag, and drop something out of the system, which then causes that document to lose its retention. So that is transparent records management. Again, we've got a folder structure set up for the records managers, as well as that separate folder for the rest of the users. Additionally, the rest of the users, one thing I wanted to point out too is, I can't remember. What happens is a shortcut to that document gets created in the folder. So all of the documents in the system are getting stored in the records folder, and they're being shortcut to that folder structure for everyone else to see. All right, and so the next type of records management deployment is going to be flexible records management. So flexible records management is one of the newer ways to deploy retention in the repository, because it allows us to take advantage of the workflow activities that Laserfiche had released. So with this type of deployment, documents are stored in a single folder structure, so there's no need to replicate or copy the folder structure and retention that's managed by users. Users just bring a document into the system, they apply a couple of metadata fields, and those metadata fields drive the auto filing, the renaming, and the application of the records retention schedule on that file all automatically. So let's take a look at that. So I'm going to go into this records management demo. This is going to be our repository that we're working out of. And as we can see here, we have just a single folder structure. This is just my demo environment, so it's strictly a sample. Yours, I'm sure, looks different than this. But the way that the records management, the flexible records management works is we're going to go into this test file and we're going to get some test docs for flexible records management. So I'm just going to grab all of these documents here. Before I open them, let's take a look at the metadata. They've all been filled out with metadata information. So again, this could be something maybe Quick Fields captures for you, or something that is automated when you drag a document into a folder, or something again that your team just manually applies when they bring it into the system. And then if we take a look at the records properties, we'll see that there are no records properties associated with this document currently. I'm going to highlight or drag and drop this whole batch into our incoming scans. So again, it's very typical if you work with CDI for your deployment to have an incoming scans folder set up so that you get that standardization across your repository. So I dragged and dropped all those documents into incoming scans. If I click F5 to refresh, we can see they're kind of going away, which means that workflow is picking up those documents and it's filing them away into our folder structure. So if we go into administration, I'm actually going to refresh once more because I don't know where those documents actually filed. Refresh.
They're further down in the folder structure, Laura. If you open up the City Council, just keep going down.
Perfect. Thank you. So I was going to show here, you can use these column headers to search by last modified. So if you're ever not sure, this is a quick, easy way to find that content. But then if we go into administration, City Council, communications, they're in here somewhere.
Any of those? Yeah, there you go. They're in there inside the year folders.
All right, here's one of our samples, last modified today. Just took me a minute to find it. So it auto-filed and renamed our document, so it applied the filing date to the document. And if we right-click on this file, we can go into the records properties and we can see that now there are cutoff instructions for the end of the fiscal year. And then once that cutoff has been initiated, it goes into its retention cycle of 7 years, and then it can be destroyed. So all automatically with flexible records management, you no longer have to manage documents in records folders. You can have the retention applied directly to the documents or the folders when they're filed away in the system. It makes records management deployments a lot easier, a lot more intuitive for end users because they don't need to think about it. They just know that, hey, this is a council correspondence document. I have to apply that document type, and then Laserfiche with workflow and records management does the rest. So now let's talk about the CDI custom records management workflow activities. So these are workflow activities that were created by CDI to make records management or to make records retention, deployment, and cleanup much easier. So these activities allow you to make updates in bulk versus on a one-by-one basis. So first up, we have automatically set the disposition authority. So the disposition authority is a unique identifier assigned by the NARA, so the National Archives, to outline the length of time that records need to be kept and maintained. So all government agencies need to adhere by these disposition authority guidelines. So this activity might be useful because when setting up your retention schedules for files, organizations may not have applied this disposition authority number, or DAN, also known as the DAN number, on their records. And then having that DAN number associated with your files, it's not required, but it can certainly make searching and retrieval easier, especially in the event of an audit. So let's say an auditor comes out and they want to reference all of the documents associated with, blank blank DAN number. And instead of digging through the repository and finding, all the different folders that those documents may reside in, again, for example, human resources documents. You hire employees and they get terminated all at different times. So their retention schedules are different. Each employee has a different retention schedule. Well, it's the same retention schedule, but the timing starts based differently depending on when they were either hired or terminated. So the DAN can be set one by one by a user who has the appropriate records permissions, but they can also be done with a custom workflow activity to make the adjustment in bulk. So I am going to show these custom workflow activities in action. They are all pretty similar, so I'm really only going to show a couple of them live. So that's the first one, automatically set the disposition authority where you can apply that number to your documents. And then if I jump back into the repository, I'll show you again where that resides. So if we go into the records properties, we can see that there's no disposition authority applied to this document. It's something we could manually apply one by one, or again, with those workflow activities, we can apply them in bulk. So the next activity is the event date. It's the occurrence or unsetting the event date. So the event date is an occurrence that may cause certain types of records to be cut off in Laserfiche. So when a record is cut off in Laserfiche, that means that the record is closed and it prevents its content from being modified and deleted. But it also indicates that that is the start of the record's retention phase. So for example, the federal guideline for retaining records in an employee personnel file is for 4 years after their termination date. So as long as that employee is current within your organizations, you need to retain those files. But once their employment has been terminated, the files get cut off and must be retained for 4 additional years. Retention for HR can be tricky, especially if you're leveraging Laserfiche transparent records management, because not all of your employees' records need to be maintained for only 4 years. Some files, like certain medical records or COBRA plans, need to be maintained for 6 years. So by leveraging the flexible records management and using the metadata field for document type associated with your documents, will really, again, make this flexible records management way easier for your team. So additionally, when setting up your record series, mistakes can be made. So let's say you had transparent records management and you want to switch to flexible records management. Being able to unset the event date on your files with this custom workflow activity can save you so much time. So you can do it in bulk instead of on a one-by-one basis. So next we have the automate setting the record as vital. So something I want to call out here is that some organizations think of vital records as permanent records, but they're in fact different. A vital record contains information in which an organization needs to operate, without which the organization could not operate, and is subject to periodic reviews and updates. So some examples of this may be standard operating procedures, or safety procedures, or legal or financial records. A permanent record is something that the organization needs to retain forever. So Laserfiche gives organizations the ability to mark records as vital or permanent. When they are marked as vital, you also have the ability to set up a review date or calculate a review date for that record. Additionally, Laserfiche makes searching for vital records easy by making a quick search syntax available. The CDI workflow activity allows users to set records as vital in bulk. So if you want to make all of your standard operating procedural files as vital with an annual review, the workflow activity allows you to configure the workflow to make the document, to find the documents in your system, mark them as vital, and update the schedule to whatever you define. Finally, we have automate setting the record as permanent. This is probably self-explanatory, but again, it allows you to search the repository and set files in bulk as permanent. Otherwise, any of these activities can be done on a one-by-one manual basis as needed. So more typically, an organization would use these custom activities to clean up their existing document management designs. So let's take a look at a couple of those in action. All right, so we are going to go into our additional folder structure, and we are going to mark these documents as permanent. So in my system, if I go ahead and I right-click on this records property, we'll see that these files are not designated as permanent, but they need to be. And instead of me clicking one by one on all of these documents, what I can do is start a business process, or again, you can just manually kick off this workflow. You can set it up a number of different ways. And I am going to kick off the business process or on-demand workflow for making these documents permanent. I'm gonna click start. Yes. And so now what's going to happen is the workflow is going to find all of the documents that match my criteria, and they're going to go ahead and mark them as permanent. So now if I go back into this file, hopefully I gave it enough time, click on records, we can now see that these records are designated as permanent. So same with this disposition authority. So if I come into, any folder, or I say any file that is associated with this document type, I need to set the DAN number as XYZ. I can build a workflow that allows me to do that. So again, I don't have to peruse through my folder structure, click on every document, open the records properties, and then apply the DAN number. That can take forever. Nobody wants to do that. So you build a workflow to do that for you. And so again, I just have mine in my demo environment set up as a business process, and I'm going to set the disposition authority, click start. And so all of the documents that match my criteria for updating the disposition authority to XYZ are going to be updated. So now if I click on that document again, I go into records properties, we'll see that that disposition authority has now been applied. And then I can also search on that as well. All right, so now unsetting the event date and the vital records are, again, very similar. You just build your workflow to set the criteria that you're looking for, and then kick it off, and it runs the process for you. So let's jump into the workflow designer really quick. I am not a workflow expert, but I'll be able to show you a quick example of how this looks. So if you're new to Laserfiche workflow, this is the designer where you build your workflow processes. And I have mine set up here in the Laserfiche demo section. Thanks, Jeremy. And we are going to review this set disposition. So I'm going to go ahead and view the workflow. And as you could, it's a super simple search the repository for documents that meet XYZ criteria. And then for each of those entries, set the DAN number to XYZ, whatever you want it to be. So very simple, easy way for you to clean up your existing records management deployment should you need assistance. And actually, before I continue on, I want to go ahead and launch a quick poll. I'm very curious to see, are you using records management currently or not? We'll give it just a second. Excellent. So I'm thinking you're seeing the poll results. So 38% have implemented records management, 31 haven't. 23 of you are hoping to learn more, and then some of you have just started. So we've got a really great variety. For those of you that are fully implemented, I'd be curious to know, a little bit more on how the system is working for you, and if you can see these workflow activities being helpful to your organization and maybe cleaning it up, or maybe it's just great if you have no problems. Hopefully that's the case, but in case it's not, they're there to help. All right, so let's jump back into the PowerPoint, figure it out. All right, so now that we've talked about the different ways to deploy records retention, let's talk about the design services that CDI offers. So our team is well versed in records retention as we've been deploying the module for over 20 years. Recently, we've revolutionized our process as we've consulted with a certified municipal clerk who had been using Laserfiche at a previous position. In addition to configuring your auto filing, naming, and retention processes, we've simplified the cutoff and reporting automation for records managers as well. So this includes things like deploying standardized conclusion workflows. So if we are one of our newer records clients, you can probably expect to see some of these features that I'm going to talk about deployed with your system. So one of those workflows is for auto cutoffs. So instead of your organization needing to manually cut off a document every time it's eligible, so that contract, it expired on August 1st, and instead of you trying to remember, oh, I have to go cut that document off, we have built a workflow that automatically queries your system for documents that are eligible for cutoff and cuts them off. It runs overnight, so you don't ever have to think about whether or not your documents are cut off. So another conclusion workflow is the disposition log. So some organizations want to have a list of documents sent to them prior, or a list of documents that are eligible for destruction sent to them prior to running their actual destruction. So this is just kind of an example of an email that might go out. It tells you maybe what document templates applied, the document name, what the path is, has the disposition been met, and then what the final action is. So you have a nice handy list of all of the content in your system that is eligible for disposition. And then from here, this could potentially be forwarded to an archivist, so you can offer up those documents to them, for further retention on their end. But essentially, at that point, you would be able to destroy them within your system. Another deployment standard is our destruction logs. So destruction logs are very similar, and they are initiated by a business process, so an on-demand workflow. And what it does is it queries the system and generates a destruction log for what has been deleted, when it was deleted, and by who. So here's kind of a quick example of what that looks like. So Laserfiche out of the box doesn't just do this for you, but as we've been deploying more and more records and policies and procedures are changing, we have implemented this as kind of one of our standards. So again, it tells you the DAN number, the record series titles, the date of the records, when it was destroyed, a quick description, and then who it was destroyed by. So that's something that you can keep really easily in a log, This also can and does get stored in your Laserfiche repository, so you have a record of the destruction logs, you know, again, archived within your system. All right, so that kind of concludes what I had on the agenda today. So again, going through the different types of records management deployments, as well as the CDI workflow activities and some of our newer conclusion workflows for streamlining your records management and retention process. In addition, on the screen here, we have a couple of helpful resources. So of course, our CDI website, check that out. And then our YouTube channel where any of our webinars are recorded for you to go ahead and reference later. And then we do have an upcoming webinar for supercharging your data with Import Agent. Something I always like to throw out there with Import Agent. So if you have users who don't have access to your Laserfiche repository right now, they can add content to a network folder, and then this Import Agent tool monitors that folder and brings them into Laserfiche. And those records can even be incorporated into your records retention policy too. So not every user necessarily has to have a license depending on how your infrastructure is set up. And of course, take a look and register for this webinar if you'd like to learn more. So now we're going to open it up for questions. So feel free to type any questions into the chat, and we'll go ahead and address them. And then while I kind of wait for that, I am going to launch another poll. Just wondering if you're interested in learning more. Maybe this was helpful, maybe it wasn't, you know, just kind of see. All right. It looks like a majority of you are interested in learning more either now or in the future, which is really great. Of course, CDI is here always to help. My contact information is here on the screen if you want to reach out. Otherwise, you can reach out to sales or consulting or support. And if one of us can't assist you, we'll definitely get you to the appropriate department. It looks like we do have one question. So for those with a half-implemented TRM system, what steps would you recommend for making the jump to flexible records management? So as part of the Laserfiche consulting services that we offer, what we would typically do is start with a system review. Where we would get hands-on with your system, dig into what you have implemented right now, and then from there we can make recommendations on what we would require for moving you to more of a flexible records management system. And so that initial consultation is typically covered under your LSAP. And then we put together the plan, and then from there it's up to your team as to whether or not you'd like to proceed forward with the plan or get it implemented in budgets for future deployment. All right, doesn't look like we have any other questions at this time. I would just want to say thank you to everybody for joining me today. Please take a couple minutes and submit your feedback on that review form once this closes out. And again, this webinar will be available through our YouTube channel for you to share with your friends, and also take a look at some of those other resources as well. Thank you, everyone.